Hey folks, guess what? I took a shower, and what's prompted me to take a shower is the fact that we're doing this show called Isolation Nation.
It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. 50 shows with lots of guests. Here's Michael Landsberg to give you a list, yeah.
Mitch Marner, Serena Ryder, Michael Delzato, Tessa Virtue, Mike Riley, George LaRock.
Yeah, that's enough. I'm bored. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation. It's pretty wiggly. Now here's a dog whose name is Wrigley.
It's a nation in isolation. Such a difficult situation.
It's a nation in isolation. I think I had a heart palpitation. Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, I love that. It's kind of boasting saying, hey, we've done 50 shows, but it's not me boasting. It's this little small team that has come together to do something that we like to believe is making a difference. 50 shows, as you saw, more than 100 guests. And we try to talk about mental health in as many different ways as we can. And I try to relate it to my own life because my life has been not dominated by mental health struggles, but certainly affected by it. Anxiety has been one of my battles. And it's kind of like, for me, I had anxiety when I was 4 from that point on. And when my anxiety gets really, really, really bad, when I feel myself just every second, like it's like I have an electrical voltage going through me that's this low level, but I can feel it every place I go, every breath I take. And that leads me to depression, which has led me to doing something like this. I am going to introduce to you a friend of mine. I met him a number of years ago on Off the Record, and he has become to me a symbol of a generation that's not willing to just take what is doled out to them. It's a generation of people that say, hey, you know what? Hey, I got a mental health challenge. I need your assistance just like I would need if I had a physical illness. Royce White, how are you, man? Good to see you. Thank you for your time. What's going on?
I'm great, man. Good to see you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure too. So, you were first round draft choice in the NBA in 2012 by the Houston Rockets after a phenomenal college career. You obviously did not make the Houston Rockets, and it became a big deal because there was more to the story than just being, like not everybody makes an NBA team. Not every first round draft choice does. But your story has brought a lot of focus to the idea that maybe the NBA wasn't ready to handle somebody like you with a mental health challenge. What do you think they could have done for you that would have allowed you to really show what you can do with the skills that you had?
Well, I think they could have been honest. I think that the key to navigating mental health in any reasonable fashion is to commit to the idea and ethic of honesty. They weren't honest. What they tried to do is make me seem like I was asking for special treatment, that I was a diva or that I was high maintenance. But really, what I asked for is that the NBA and its peripheral corporate network acknowledge where we are today with our mental health knowledge and implement that not only in their attitudes towards their players, but in their policies towards their players and in their policies in general. And it wasn't something that was really argued or debated on behalf of the NBA. Nobody told me that I was wrong in these closed doors meetings. Nobody said that I was off the mark on the mental health crisis being on the rise around the world. What they said was, we don't have to change it because you don't have enough leverage. And that's what they could have done. And that's what they still need to do is to, check their ego a bit and understand that the mental health crisis and its attention will be beneficial to us all.
So did you do a pre-draft interview with the Houston Rockets? Like, would they have done a conversation with you? And I'm sure they did. And, did the topic of mental health come up? Did you bring it up? Were they aware of anything in your life in this area?
Well, I had gone public with my struggles with anxiety while I was still in college. Actually, it become a central story of the draft. Besides Anthony Davis going number one, my story of anxiety and my being afraid to fly and how that would affect my draft position was another central story, especially since Anthony Davis and I had just gone head to head in the NCAA tournament in a matchup that I had gotten the better of. So everybody was well aware of my anxiety disorder. I made sure that in all of my meetings with the teams at the pre-draft combine in Chicago and in my individual interviews in different places around the NBA that I was very forthright about my anxiety disorder and about my position on mental health as it pertains to modern culture.
So when you look back at this, why do you think they drafted you if they weren't ready to create an environment that was best for you? Because first round draft choices are important to a team. You were number 16, right?
I think that from the outside looking in, a lot of people have a sort of false sense of the importance of draft picks, even in the higher up selection spots, right? Even number one, number two draft picks. We see all the time now that teams are in this sort of hustle and bustle, shuffle the deck type of culture where people aren't trying to build long-term cultures, long-term plans with individual players. They're trying to piece them together and create whatever team they think best has the shot to win it. When it comes to me personally, I think that they drafted me because my coach, Fred Hoiberg, had a personal relationship with Kevin McHale. Kevin McHale went in and vouched for me. Kevin McHale's a Minnesota guy, Minnesota legend, icon. Mm-hmm. And Daryl Morey and some of those people who were in the room in the decision-making position, were convinced or allowed Kevin McHale to convince them that I was worth the risk. And I think I was worth the risk. And actually, to be quite honest, I think if I was playing with the Houston Rockets right now, they would have won a championship already. But at the same time, again, we go back to the ethic of honesty. And ultimately, once I got there and once I put them in the uncomfortable position of having to address an epidemic that had been in the league for a long time, my worth, even in winning, became insignificant.
I want to show you some stuff from Friday's show. We had six people on the show. I guess 3 of them were former NHL players. One was a paramedic who suffered from severe PTSD. 2 guys were comedians, including Alonzo Bowden. I don't know if you know Alonzo. Yep. He won Last Comic Standing. And what they all had in common was they all have addiction issues, and they all are sober, varying from 60 days to, in the case of Alonzo Bowden, 32 years. Have you self-medicated before? And if you haven't, has anybody in your family done it where it's been an issue in your life?
Yeah, me personally, my anxiety was catalyzed by my first experience with marijuana. So I count that as a blessing because from that day, drugs and alcohol just seemed like an obvious no as a way to cope with my own personal struggles, whether they be specifically anxiety related or any personal struggles in my life. So I've done a good job of staying away from drugs and alcohol altogether. And to be honest, the people in my family, my immediate family, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather were never people that I saw drink, certainly never had drugs in the home. Now, obviously, I grew up in a neighborhood and I grew up in neighborhoods where drugs and alcohol were prevalent forms of coping or were prevalent coping mechanisms, but it hasn't been a huge part of my life, no.
What you said, well, let's roll this and then I'll tell you my story about marijuana. It didn't go well for me either. As a matter of fact, almost an identical story. But this is Friday's show, a little bit from each of the 6 amazing guests. Roll it, Phil.
alcohol, certainly, you think it's making you a happier person and more fun and more easygoing and all of that. And it's really not. It's exacerbating your depression. Like I would do it to make myself more happy, more fun. But at the end of it all, I would always be like, I hate myself.
I was a binge drinker. Like Sean said, if it was in front of me and I had a day off the next day, once the cap was off, it wasn't going back on until it was done. So
I have 11,778 days, but it's still one day at a time. And what happened with me, and they taught me this, and I heard this, right? Like you talked about non-alcoholic beer, okay? I never drank for the taste. Like there's a level of honesty, right? So like Sean was saying, I did it for the effect. I never was like at a social crack use party. You know what I mean? Like it was about the effect. So I don't drink with non-alcoholic beer because they told me, they're like, what are you kidding? I never drank beer because it was hot outside. I drank beer for the effect.
I hid behind alcohol and drugs for so long because I was embarrassed. I was so, oh my goodness, I was petrified of anyone knowing, especially in my world of paramedicine, knowing that I was sick, and I didn't want to know I was sick either. But yeah, knowing now what I know, at least I can be honest with my kids if I'm struggling, if I'm having a bad day. And I've said this before, we talk about mental health and we talk about our emotions like we talk about the weather.
It stopped becoming fun. And I think Alonzo could understand there was a point where it just wasn't fun anymore. And it went from only doing cocaine if it was at the party, to swearing I'd never buy it, to buying it, to buying a lot of it, to getting busted. And it was just a progression that never seemed to stop. It never got better. I had to make a decision at 25 whether I wanted to walk away from this game, the only thing that I knew how to do, or get healthy, because everything was coming crashing down on me.
That is 6 different stories that they all took different paths to get to the conclusion that their life was basically on the line. They needed to find a way to quit. But Royce, the thing that all of those people have in common is the idea that they were in pain. All of them talked about social anxiety. All of them talked about the difficulty of walking into a room. I mean, Sean Cullen's a really successful stand-up comedian. And he said, I couldn't go into a room with people unless I had a drink. And that, there's such an important lesson there in that people don't get addicted to medication or alcohol because they think it sounds like a great idea because it's fun. They do it to mask the things that you and I have both experienced.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, those are powerful stories. We all have some things going on in our lives at different points in times, different things going on at different points in times. I think that, our society has done a huge disservice in preparing us for how to properly cope with the struggles of life. And we kind of have to take a crash course. I think our schools and our education system needs to do a better job. Our families as well, but I think our education system needs to do a better job emphasizing the importance of the mind, of being healthy of the mind, and how to at least enter these situations, these dark moments in life with some type of roadmap on how to be effective.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you think of, I was in high school a long time before you, but, sex education is a normal thing in high school. Like no high school would ever go without, talking about pregnancy and, just all the areas that go around that. But for God's sakes, do they talk about suicide? Do they ever mention suicide? Do they talk about depression? Do they talk about anxiety? You got a room filled with people, all of who are suffering, think they're the only ones because no one ever talks about it.
Yeah, I think the sex education, was overshot, and it was done in a very incompetent way. I think it was a very incompetent initiative of our school systems, especially when you consider the lack of mental health education. So yeah, I mean, I think that the immediate remedy would be to start to phase out such a heavy sex ed program and bring in a more integrated mental health program.
So how you doing now? 2012 when you were drafted is now obviously I'm doing the math 8 years ago. How's your mental health right now, today, or in general right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a unique place right now as a Black man in America. Obviously, thinking about what it means to be a Black man in America, what it will mean for my children and their children. What is the call to duty? What is the call to true citizenship in this moment, as somebody who has a voice and a platform, as somebody who's a leader in their community, as somebody who is a voice for a much larger global mental health community. How to best act and move forward with the things that are on the table right now in America.
That doesn't tell us how you're doing, though. How are you? I mean, anxiety was a big part of your life.
I'm contemplating, and the anxiety comes and goes, obviously, with everything that's been going on here in the Twin Cities for the last, 3-4 weeks now. Different moments I felt very anxious. And at different moments, I find hope and peace and serenity and some of the ways people have come together here. So, it's like anything with mental health and like with life, there are ups and downs.
What does anxiety feel like to you? I mean, anxiety is a word that, I think is just as misunderstood as depression, because everybody has anxiety, but not everybody has anxiety, the illness. Not everyone needs to be treated for anxiety like I needed to be treated for anxiety and depression. What is it? How do you describe it?
I would describe my anxiety as a constant feeling of pressure and stress. It has a sound to it. It has a sound to it. It has a rhythm to it inside your mind, in your ears, in your body. And it's tough to kind of describe it all inclusively because it takes on so many variations. But at base, and the baseline, that's how I would describe it. It's a constant pressure and stress.
Yeah, I mean, I said it, I think about 10 minutes ago. I said, it's kind of like I get this electrical charge that's running through my body. And it's like if there was a physical manifestation of anxiety, it would be this. It would be me doing this, like, come on, okay, let's go. Where I can't turn it down. I can't turn it off. And the problem is what you described when you were talking about what it feels like to you and how it affects you, people would say, dude, that's life, man. And yeah. I think that, dude, I added the dude part, but because I call everybody dude who are my friends.
I know what you mean. That's the flippant, dismissive reaction. And the reality is that our society has done a great trick, has pulled off a great trick into convincing people that that quality of life is what they should come to expect and what they should come to be content with, and what they should advise other people to be content with, even more so. I think we should all be aspiring to a better quality of life, given the blessings we've been giving in terms of our mind and our ability to sort out some of these things. And so, people who talk like that and say, oh, well, dude, that's life. I just put them on a shelf right away. And you'll probably reap the benefits of our mental health advocacy down the road, or your children will, or somebody else who you may not know that you love that suffer from these issues. They'll reap the benefits of our work. That those people are just not in a position to be able to understand what we're really talking about here.
I love what you just said, man. We're going to clip that and use that. It's exactly. It's like, how many times have you heard this? I used to think that anxiety and depression were bullshit. Oh man, and then all of a sudden when it hit me, I realized I was wrong about this.
Every day I get messages from people every day who try to tear me down back when I first started talking about mental health and say, oh, get over it, just smoke a joint, or, just relax, or, how are you afraid to fly on planes, or, all of the little cheap stories that the media try to run about my fight with the NBA. And I get messages from them today on a daily basis saying, hey, man, I just had my first panic attack. I was completely wrong for my position before, or my wife is now suffering from anxiety, or my mother has come down with schizophrenic episodes, or, all kinds of stories. And, you just let those things come. And I had the intuition and the foresight to see how important this was before. And that doesn't mean that I should rub it in people's face. So I try and carry that graciously. But there are still people who to this day go, how can you talk? You can't even fly on a plane. It's like, all right, man, you're on the shelf,
Yeah, you're on the shelf till you need me. And then when you understand me. But see, by the way, I got to tell you the story of me. I smoked a joint when I was, I don't know, like 19, and it did nothing. So I did it again, and it did nothing. And I remember saying to my buddy, Mike Lease, I went, this bullshit, man, this doesn't do anything. And all of a sudden it hit me, and I went into this paranoid, psychotic type break where I was sure that I was dying. I was 100% sure that I was dying. And I swore if I ever got better that I would never smoke again, until about 10 years ago when I thought, yeah, you know what? Maybe I can try it. Maybe I can get off medication, because, I'd certainly rather not be on medication. Same thing happened. I remember I was alone in the house, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I got to call the cops. And then I go, you can't call the cops. You can't call the cops if you're on drugs, right? So I thought, right, I'm going to go see my neighbors and tell them to help me. And then I realized I didn't like my neighbors. So I had like no place to go. And eventually it kind of passed. But that was my lesson that, self-medication is not for me.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your life right now. And when was the last time that you were protesting on the street? When was the last time that you went out and said, you know what? In this time in America, we need to not sit back and wait for change. We need to demand change. When was that?
We went out and marched on Saturday afternoon. So Saturday afternoon into Saturday evening.
Because you're in Minneapolis, right? I mean, that's where George Floyd was killed. When you marched, did you march past the area where he was murdered?
One day. We've been out on 4 separate marches now. One of the days our route was from US Bank Stadium, home of the Minnesota Vikings, to 38th in Chicago, where George Floyd was murdered. So we've been to the spot. I've been to the spot a couple of times anyway. I've gone down and filmed the protests when it was more of a riot, and the citizens had their confrontation with the 3rd precinct there. So yeah, I've been around the entire situation for the last 3 weeks.
What do you think? What do you hope to achieve? I know a big picture I shouldn't say we all hope to achieve, but there's a lot of people that don't want you to achieve your goal. There's a lot of people that profit off the existing system, which to me says that it's a hell of a battle that you have to fight, because even though they may not say it, there's a lot of people who control a lot of power who don't want things to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think our ultimate goal, for myself personally and for the 10K Foundation, is to reopen a negotiation between the state and the free people of America on the social contract that exists between them. And I think that in order to do so, we're going to need a lot of people to become mobilized and to understand the subtleties of that renegotiation. So for us, marching isn't about an awareness campaign. Everybody's well aware of the injustices that Black people and Black men face in this country in general, and as it pertains to the police. Our goal of marching is to occupy the space we want as free people in this country, and have the state see us as an independent entity, and have to negotiate the terms of engagement with us along those lines. So out of 4 marches and 50,000 people, we've shut down many bridges. We've shut down some federal highways. We've occupied spaces that the state would say aren't supposed to be. And we haven't had one confrontation with the state. And along that same vein, we also haven't had any confrontations within the marches. We haven't had any fights. We haven't had any fires. We haven't had any arrests. We haven't had any medical emergencies. So what we're proving firsthand by going out and demonstrating this way is that we are over-policed, and we can exist on our own with some type of civility without the constant oversight of the state.
You know, you're one of the guys that I can ask this question to, and that is, how do you see Canada versus the United States? Because you lived in London, Ontario for 2 National Basketball League of Canada seasons where, I mean, you had, not surprisingly, phenomenal success, the best player in the league both years. But you were able to see, you know, as a black man in London, how you were looked at, how you were treated. Contrast that to how you would be treated in your own city of Minneapolis.
Yeah, so I can't really speak to the historical context of Canada because I'm not that well versed on it, and I'm positive that the black-white dynamic doesn't carry the same historical context as it does here in America. I felt nothing but love and support when I was in Canada, to be honest. And that's my honest, you know, experience. In London, I'm sorry, you know, we made a couple trips to Newfoundland, and then we had a couple racial incidents where fans out there were, you know, drunk, intoxicated at the games and shouting some stuff that was, you know, racially charged. But, you know, overall, I can't say that I ran into any situations in London or in Canada that left me feeling anything like I do here at home. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some other issues with the Canadian system. That's not to say that racism doesn't exist in Canada. It's just that my personal experience hasn't been anywhere near what it's been here in America.
Yeah, and I think that that's a story that a lot of people would tell. I can't tell you that story because if I thought I could tell you what it's like, what racism in Canada is like, then you'd have to call me on it and say, well, you know, how would you know that? You know, and that's part of the problem is white people thinking that they understand what black people are feeling. White people, and this is not totally different than mental health, that if you haven't been through anxiety like Royce White has been through, you can't understand it. And the only thing you can do is say, I don't understand it. Because if you think that you do, then you got a problem. And the same thing with me and your color.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think there's something to be said for white folks, you know, white people in America and around the world taking a step back and, you know, understanding that they don't have the right to tell black people how to be outraged, right? And just don't be flippant. You know, one of the things I'm getting online right now as I continue to voice my opinion on some of these matters is, you know, well, you want reparations for a slavery that you never had to endure, or for slaves that I never owned. Those are just flippant, you know, reactions that really speak to an underlying subtle racism, and we could do without them. The conversation could do without them. But at the same time, I'll say that kind of trolling kind of culture of you know, little snarky remarks isn't just around race issues. That's become the new internet culture. That's become the new civilized culture in general around all issues, and it's part and parcel of a new technocracy that does have real race problems, you know, in their hierarchy, right? Your Facebooks and Googles and things like that. They play like they don't, but they do. They do.
I mean, that's where, you know, the bravest group of people, the most courageous people on the planet are the ones that say those things to you in some kind of social media form. They would never say that to your face. But, you know, there's the ability, you know, I think in a lot of ways, the true racist comes out online, right? Because there is no inhibition. You know, you're not at a Timberwolves game yelling bad things at black people because that wouldn't fly well with some people in the crowd.
There's a social etiquette into being somewhere physically and in person that the internet takes away. And so, you know, if you look at that from a further out lens, you could say that, you know, the new technocracy has created a culture that is non-consequential, and created a non-consequential culture on top of a racist society automatically proliferates racist interactions.
I want to speak to the guy. What was the tweet case to me, or it was on Facebook? I think it was you drunk. What was it? Drunk, manic depressive Jew. But I got to tell the person who said that, the only thing that pissed me off was that Jew is not J-O-O. Hello? Yeah, right. I mean, are you? Could you look more like a redneck now? Jew, J-O-O. But I mean,
that's the culture of the internet, though. You know, is we've given people a space where we've created a space where people could be everything and anything they want to be with no form of morals or ethics. And there is a conversation to be had about freedom of speech and allowing people to be who they're going to be. And I'm all for that. What I have a problem with personally is that so much of our modern economy is driven by the traffic of whoever, regardless of morals and ethics. And that's what could be refined is are we actually allowing the trolls of people that come to any given space on the internet to really shape our next move as corporations? So, there's a corporate ethic that can always be adhered to. What individuals do in their homes around the world is a tough thing to rein in.
One of the things that I believe, being a Jew, is that if you and I went to Poland together and we went to Auschwitz, that you and I could be equally horrified by what went on. We could both look at it in identical ways. But the one thing that would be hard for you would be to understand the history behind it. And I think the same thing is if you and I went to the street that George Floyd was killed, then I could be absolutely as appalled as you. I mean, I'm a human being. He was a human being. Before he's black and before I'm white, we're folks. But the one thing that I think would be lacking for me is a historical understanding ingrained into me what it means to be black, and in the other example, what it means to be Jewish.
Yeah, I would agree somewhat. I think, look, I'll say this. I think that the relationship between blacks and Jews around the world, but specifically in America, needs to become much closer and much more harmonious. I don't like the who suffered more game between blacks and Jews. And I think that it is somewhat relevant in many ways what blacks and Jews have both suffered. And I think that they let Hitler go too far, right? And I think that they let a number of world governments and states go too far, and that they should have been stopped. And the same thing is true of America's original sins with black people in the slave trade, and Britain in the East India Trading Company. And so in both situations, we see where the state and where leaders and where people in power go too far. And it's along those lines that I think blacks and Jews can and should come together. And I'll leave it there for now.
Well, I actually, I think I guess I didn't really explain my point very well. My point was that you don't have to be black to walk on the street that George Floyd was murdered to be horrified. Right. Maybe you have to be black to understand the historical significance of it. Similarly, I'm saying you don't have to be Jewish to go, oh my God, the Holocaust was horrific. Like at a certain point, we're just, we're people. You and I are people. And if I was with you and you got murdered, I would be devastated by the fact that you died.
So I'll help. I'll give you why I gave that little pushback. And what my point is, I think those things help racist white people in and around the world have a scapegoat for why they continue the atrocity that they do, right? Is that, well, if you're not that, then you have no real understanding of what that is. And it's the same thing with the mental health piece, right? Is we say, well, David Stern or Adam Silver can't really bring themselves to understand why mental health is so important because they've never experienced it. It's like, that's a lie. That's dishonest. And I don't have to be Jewish to understand the historical context. That's why it's called history. right? Is you know, that's what we would call an epistemological crisis, right? Is when you can't abstract that I could have easily been a Jewish person in Auschwitz, and if I was in Auschwitz as a Jewish person, this is how atrocious this thing would be in history. And so I totally feel comfortable being sympathetic and being putting myself in the shoes of a Jewish person in modern society and throughout history through those persecutions. And I think we let, white supremacists or any type of racist individual off the hook by saying, hey, well, if you're not black, then now we get why you don't understand how that's a problem. It's like, no, you get it. I'm not going for it. You get it.
I'm going to go and look up epistemological or epistemological.
Epistemological, yeah.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's basically a crisis of being able to abstract things beyond your own personal experience, right? In so many words. But the study of epistemology is, the study of time and knowledge, right? And so, yeah, I think, people have, and those are the lines that these conversations need to go to. They need to go back to a more philosophical place, because I do believe that we are muddying up the conversation sometimes with things that we don't necessarily need to, like, and we let people off the hook. Like, I think we let David Stern off the hook, rest in peace, obviously, Adam Silver, Donald Trump, Barack Obama. We've let so many great leaders off the hook by saying, oh, well, they just don't understand. And it's like, I am far less optimistic. I'm much more pessimistic when it comes to people's malevolence, people's dishonesty, people's selfishness, people's ability to deceive. And that comes from that psychological base, right? When you have that psychological base, you understand just how capable man is to malinger all of these conversations and situations. So, epistemology is one of the crises we face, for sure.
Great to see you. Great to talk to you, Ben. And great that you would give us your time, which obviously is pretty precious at any time. But, you've got, as you have said, a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to be done. And nice seeing your face as well.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's always a pleasure getting with you and talking. We gotta make sure we chat more. I definitely appreciate coming on and speaking to your audience.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Thanks, brother.
When I was talking about, walking through the streets of Minneapolis, man, I would do that in a heartbeat. But we can't cross the border these days, so we'll just have to wait for that.
We'll wait. Well, I'm sure by the time they open the borders back up, if they ever do, we'll still have plenty of fight to go, and we can get you to the front lines. It's a pretty special experience. The last thing I'll say is, one of the most positive things I've seen from all of this is when people come together physically and in an organic way like that, of like mind and like spirit, there is something so healing about it, right? And we talk about marching, like I said, more as an awareness campaign, but really we're healing the trauma. And I think we've provided a situation here in the Twin Cities for people to protest, where it's not just about the sorrow and the hurt and the pain, but it's also about the hope.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, brother.
Royce White, I talked to him shortly after 2012, I think. It doesn't really matter when it was. And immediately you realize that if you're looking for a warrior on your side, that's the guy. Extremely bright, extremely passionate, not afraid to back down, which is what we need for sure. That's today's show of Isolation Nation. As we say goodbye, I want to look back to Friday's show just a little bit with Jordan Tutu, who played for years in the NHL and told a story that will live in my head, certainly, for a long time. We'll see you tomorrow.
My alcoholism really started to escalate into my professional career. I was, a pretty functional drunk. So I thought, when I decided that it was time for me to accept help, I live by three three sentences my brother left me. It said, "Jor, go all the way, take care of the family. You are the man, Terrence." I grabbed that note and I crunched it up and I threw it in the garbage because I was like, wow, my brother's never ever said anything like that to me. You know, that was very nice of him. Well, a day later, I went back to that trash can and I grabbed that note, and you know, that same day I found out that my brother took his own life, and those were his last words.